All right, so welcome to the May 19th Planning Board meeting. Nancy, please roll call.
We have Commissioner Barra,
Present.
Commissioner Castellanos,
Present.
Commissioner Nierenberg, Ray, you there? I don't know if he muted himself. Ray? I think Ray muted himself. There he is. Ray, you there?
Ray, can you hear?
This is all new for Ray. What do you think, Gary?
Hey, Ray, you there?
What do you write?
We need Ray to do the minutes.
Hello. Hey, there
Ray,
you
you
are.
there? Okay,
I'm
very
here.
good, Ray. And I have Commissioner Height Norday.
I'm here.
Okay, and Chairman Leo.
Present. First,
Great.
I'd like to, before we start, I'd just like to welcome our new member. It's Nancy. Welcome aboard. We're looking forward to meeting you and working with you. So hopefully in the next month or so, we can actually see each other. So welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here,
Welcome
everyone.
aboard, Nancy.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
All right, so we have two items on the agenda this evening. One is the approval of the minutes, and then it's 21 Columbus Avenue. It's a site plan review. At this point, I'd like to make a, David, you need to make a motion to approve the December 17th meeting minutes.
Okay. I motion to approve the December 17th meeting minutes.
And then either Raymond or Laszlo needs to second.
I'll vote for, no problem.
Okay, Ray.
Raymond,
Okay, roll call. Commissioner Barra,
Approved.
Commissioner Nierenberg,
For,
and Commissioner Castellanos.
okay, then the second set of meeting minutes are the January 21st. This one, it's, I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes, and either Raymond
so
Narenberg
moved,
or second.
so moved.
You.
Okay, Commissioner Nierenberg, yes. Commissioner Castellanos,
For.
and Chairman Leo.
In favor. Okay, so 21 Columbus Avenue, can you please make a presentation? For everyone, the application has gone to the zoning board, and last month it was the application was approved by the zoning board. So at this point, they are in front of the planning board looking for site plan approval. So if the applicant would make a presentation to the board and to the public at home.
Thank you. My name is Jerry Tortorella. I'm an attorney with Hockerman, Tortorella, and Weckstein. You've met my partner, Adam Weckstein, who's been here the last several times that we've appeared before your board, and he also handled the application before the Zoning Board of Appeals. Unfortunately, Adam had a conflict tonight, so he was not able to be here with you. We also have Matthew Jarmel, who you know, and we have Stonefield Engineering, Andrew Valeri, who's here as well as some other representatives of Jarmel, Cazell, and the applicant. As you indicated, Mr. Chairman, we needed a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. We had started this process just about a year ago. We're coming up on a year anniversary. And we had appeared before your board in June of last year. And after appearing before your board, we were sent over to the Zoning Board of Appeals for the special permit, which was granted in March of this year. And that was subsequent to several public hearings Your board having had the opportunity to make recommendations to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which it took into careful consideration and reflected in its resolution of approval, as well as review comments and advice from your planner, BFJ planners. So following that process, there was a resolution of approval of the special permit that was subject to a number of conditions, which dealt with an issue that was of significant interest and discussion during the process, and that had to do with parking mitigation and measures that would be implemented. So we are back before the board now, having concluded the process with the Zoning Board of Appeals, with their for site plan approval. I know that you have heard this application a number of times before, so we don't want to belabor it, but we do want to take an opportunity, because we do have one new board member and we may have people from the public who are observing this evening and listening in, that we just want to give us a brief and succinct summary of the application and the parking mitigation that we are proposing. And with that, if it's okay with your board, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Jarmel so that he can provide that presentation, and then we'll also have Mr. Valeri available to address questions and comments.
Of course.
Good
Matthew?
evening. Thank you for hearing us this evening under these unusual circumstances of using the Zoom app. But we appreciate your efforts to meet with us and hold a public hearing, and certainly appreciate how challenging it must be for everyone. Let me start off by properly introducing myself. My name is Matthew Jarmel. I'm a registered architect, and I'm wearing two hats with this application. I'm actually the architect of record for the project, but I'm also a member of the LLC that's developing the project. As an architect, I have vast experience with childcare centers. Actually, my firm, Jarmel Keisel Architects and Engineers, has been involved in designing about 300 childcare centers around the country for various major brands, some you may have heard of. But this evening's application is for a brand called The Learning Experience. Just a little background on The Learning Experience. The Learning Experience has origins that date back to the 1980s, where the founder of The Learning Experience, Michael Weissman, actually started in the childcare industry. Back in the 80s, he owned and created a brand called Tutor Time, which you may be familiar with. It still exists today. And he built that brand up to about 300 schools before he sold his interest in it, retired, and then I was fortunate enough to meet him and his son, Richard Weissman. Richard's the current CEO of The Learning Experience, about 18 years ago, when they started their non-competes expired and they started The Learning Experience brand. Over that 18-year period, we've designed over 200 centers for them. They currently have about 260 centers, approximately, plus or minus, throughout the country. And they are developing over 100. They have that are either in lease negotiations, under construction, or in what I'll call land entitlements, like we're talking about this evening. So it's a very, very well-experienced operator that has gotten a lot of notoriety in the press recently over the last year as one of the fastest childcare growing organizations in the country. They have a curriculum that they use to educate the children that is patented. They have a very strong branding package where they actually have characters, the main one being Bubbles the elephant, that they use to motivate children to study and want to come to the centers. The child care center is licensed by the state of New York, assuming it's approved by this board and project is constructed. Once it has a certificate of occupancy, it's inspected by the State Department of Health, which issues a license to the facility for it to operate. The facility as designed is designed in strict accordance, and I'll show you the floor plans in a moment, with those guidelines. But what I wanted to kind of talk about is what a child care center is. And frequently, and there's been, leading up to tonight's hearing, there's been tremendous discussion about parking, drop-off, pickup procedures, how the school will operate. And we're certainly pleased to kind of review what that is for all of you and your new members here this evening. But unlike a public school or a private school, the center doesn't necessarily have set start and stop times. The center actually opens 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, from 6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. During that time frame, parents are allowed to drop off and pick up their children really whenever they want. Andrew Villari, my colleague who's our traffic engineer, will talk to you a little bit about when the peak times occur when I'm done speaking. But we find that the parents usually drop their children off between opening at 6:30 and about 9:30. Sometimes they start picking children up as early as noon because there are half day, 3/4 day, and full day programs available to the parents. The school is catered to take care of children of working parents. It's designed to allow parents to know that there's a safe, secure place for their children to be where they're getting educated and cared for while they're at work. Perhaps what I could just do very briefly is, may I share my screen and show you some floor plans?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me start with, is that coming through? What I'm sharing with you right now is just a Google image of the building. Can everyone see that? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so the building,
Yes.
which I should have mentioned, is is currently the Epstein department store. The building is approximately 15,000 square feet. It's actually on 2 floors. When you see it from the street, it appears to be 1 story, but because it's built into a hill with the rail line behind it, it's actually a 2-story building in the rear. We propose to use both floors of the building for the child care center. I have two floor plans, which I'll show you briefly. Let me just, okay. So this is one of the drawings that's been submitted with the board for record. What I'm circling is the first floor plan. You can see the building will have a vestibule, a reception area, it's a manager's office. There are classrooms on this level of the building. There's an indoor playroom, which gets licensed as a classroom, but it's actually used by all the children in the space. The analogy this board may have heard me use when talking about this room, it's sort of like a conference room in an office building. It's used by the occupants, but still licensed by the state. And outside of the building will be an outdoor play area as well for the children to utilize. You'll see two stairs that take you to the lower level, as well as an elevator that we will install in the building. And then the lower level will be, about 3/4 of it will be playground. Will be classrooms. And then there'll be an indoor playground of approximately 1,200 square feet. And that's typically the child care industry likes to have a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot playground. Because we have limited outdoor space, this playground will supplement the exterior playground and be used in inclement weather. There were some questions we recently got from your fire official, which we responded to formally, but I just want to just briefly mention, we plan on addressing everything he mentioned in that letter. And some of the things that he mentioned is the building has to have a sprinkler system, which he's correct about. It'll have a sprinkler system. It doesn't have one now, but it will be installed per the building code. It also needs to have a fire alarm system, which it will have, and manual pull stations as well. This drawing represents the site plan. I just want to kind of zoom in on that. So I'm outlining what the building is now. We're actually in the back demolishing a small portion of the building. I think it's about 600 square feet. It was an addition, like a storage shed. We're using the back, which is now parking, for a playground. And then the driveway will be designated for 1 car. This is a discussion that's gone on for a while, where at one point we were showing tandem parking here for several cars, but we agreed with the board's advice to limit that to 1 parking space, and there'll be a trash enclosure. One of the questions the fire department asked us is how egress from the building would work. So there are actually 3 doors on the front of the building, which by themselves would allow for proper egress from the building. But there's a stair, and one thing I'll point out that Chairman Leo was helpful in pointing out to us is there's actually a metal stair attached to the back of the building that's currently used for egress out of the lower level. Chairman Leo indicated that it's not actually, although attached to the building, it's not on our property because the rear elevation of the building is the property line. So that's going to be removed and a new fire stair installed, which will exit through the playground. And then what we've done is we've hatched out this area where egress can come out to the public way, to the street. Just a few minor comments about the licensing requirements. Will require the operator to submit emergency evacuation plans to the state as part of licensing. They work with your local first responders, your fire and police department, where they'll do regular fire drills for safety and training of the children. And in general, it's a relatively very safe facility. Some of the things that we'll talk about this evening were conditions that the zoning board put on us from the special use permit in terms of safety and the drop-off pickup procedures. What I'd like to do now, unless there are any questions of me, is turn it over to my colleague Andrew Valari, who will talk to you a little bit about traffic, parking, some of those things that we're doing to upgrade Columbus to make it a safer area. And then it'll come back to me and I'll walk you through the proposed parking subsidy that we want to do for our staff.
I have one question. Did the fire department say anything about that dumpster location? Was anything that they need access to the back of the building?
They did not. One of the things he actually somewhere I
I
have
know it's a sprinkler building, but it's
his question.
building.
Right. So the questions he asked were regarding fire separation and egress, and to show a clear path of egress, which we showed on the plan. In fact, one of his comments was that there should be vehicle protection on that walkway, as well as from the playground. So the drawing that we resubmitted to him, I'll share my screen again. So this drawing, which we resubmitted to them, we show a striped 36-inch wide walkway from the rear of the building forward so people can transition and go back and forth. We show bollards along that parking space so that the car can enter into that walkway. And he raised concern about vehicle protection for the playground, and although he didn't specifically question the dumpster location, my point would be the dumpster prevents a vehicle from getting back into the play area for safety as well.
No, I agree with that.
Now,
the only concern I have is if the fire department needs access to the building, how's that done?
the fire department has the ability to access the building from 3 doors in the front, as well as 1 door in the rear. Actually, 2 doors in the rear. There's a fire stair that exits in the rear, and then there's door into the playground. If the board or the fire department thought that the dumpster location was an issue, many times in urban sites, and arguably this is a quasi-urban site, we have a trash room in the building, and we always use private haulers. What having a dumpster does is allows us to maybe have one day a week garbage collection. But if we had a trash room inside, we could dedicate some space for trash storage and then just bring it out on collection days. And again, using a private hauler. So if that's a concern to you, Chairman Leo, we could certainly address that.
Yeah, no, again, I'm just concerned, for example, the location of the dumpster. We have a bollard, then we have a car in front of it, right? So a couple of issues. One is if the fire, if God forbid there's a fire, I know the building's protected from the interior, but if the fire department needs to get to the side of the building to fight the fire, I guess it would be a little difficult on the right-hand side. And I guess the other question is, how is trash collected if we have a car in front of the dumpster? So I'm not sure. Does your private car to come twice a week, 3 times a week, or once, whatever? So how is that garbage picked up when we have a vehicle in front of that dumpster?
Okay, so let me just share with you something. So this is Google Maps. You can see this is Columbus Ave, Underhill. This is the building. By the way, that little rectangle there is the part of the building that we're going to demolish. So although we do plan on using part of this driveway for 1 parking space, there will be a aisleway that firemen can run down. But currently, and granted not our property, but currently there's a parking lot that services the building next to us, adjacent to us, and there's a parking lot for the post office adjacent to us, both that would be accessible in the need of fighting a fire here. They could pull a fire engine up against it. You know, in these parts.
Matthew, you know that we can't, Matthew, you know we can't consider that open space, correct?
I do understand that. That's why I said, albeit not part of our building, but in an emergency, I think it would be accessible. The reality of it is fire departments typically, based on my experience, don't like to put fire trucks next to burning buildings. They like to keep them in the streets and fight the fire from there. So I do think if a fire truck had to pull up in front, just similar to the way the property is utilized now, it would probably use a ladder to spray from the roof. In response to your question about trash collection would be coordinated with whoever's parking in that 1 parking space. Presumably that's a director or a manager of the facility, and they can coordinate the time when they're in that parking space with when the trash will be picked up or disposed of. The center opens at 6:30. They could arrange for trash pickup before 6:30. It's also open to 6:30 p.m. They could arrange for it after hours. It's closed on Saturdays and Sundays, which would allow for trash collection on the weekends as well.
Can you tell me how many times a week you'll have a trash pickup?
Well, a large dumpster like this would probably be once a week.
Once a week?
Yeah, the center doesn't really generate a lot of trash. I mean,
You could just
diapers mostly.
Okay, and I'm hoping that
if you can just clarify also. Sorry, Anton, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just clarify the width of that egress from the fence to the bollards.
Yeah, we set it at 36 inches.
Okay.
over, how wide is that driveway?
The driveway is 12 feet wide.
12 feet wide.
So it leaves 9 feet width for a car. Most cars are about 6 feet wide, but parking spaces are typically 9 by 18, and it leaves 3 feet for the walkway.
Hey, Bill, can I just touch base with the fire department to make sure they're okay with the revised plan?
I think Bill is muted.
What I said was we have garbage picked up twice a week at Village Hall, and it's really not enough for the daycare.
No, what I'm saying is, can we have the revised drawing sent to the fire department and get their
Yes.
comments? They
Yes, we
express our
can.
concern.
We,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I sent as architect, I wrote a response letter to the fire department and sent it to them via email and hard copy on last week, which was on May 14th, and it was sent to Thomas Pinavale. So we've given them, Thomas Pinavale, he's a captain, fire inspector, Eastchester Fire Department. He's the gentleman that said,
Was the building department copied on correspondence as well?
I believe it was, submitted through Mary Ann at the Village Hall, but we can certainly send it on. Obviously we need their approval. Ultimately, there'll be a lot of the questions he asked were building permit questions, which I confirm we would be providing, for example, fire alarm sprinkler, but it would be reviewed during building permit, as would these egress. I even gave him a egress plan showing paths of travel out of every room for 2 means of egress out of every room. So yeah, part of our special use permit from the zoning board is there's a requirement that we have approval from both the fire department and the police department. The fire department's been wonderful communicating with us, so they're pretty simple questions. The police department has also been fairly good at communicating with us, but said that they needed authorization, I guess, from town council or from the village to review. But as you're probably aware, they've been involved in the parking review and the meter reassignment, which Mr. Valari will talk about.
But I just want to make sure that the building department is copied on all this documentation, because they should be the central hub for all this documentation.
Absolutely.
Right. And the other thing I want to talk about is that parking space in the side of the building. And so I think it makes sense to make that dedicated parking space for a manager, because if they have to move the car for any reason whatsoever, you don't want to take a teacher away from the kids. So I think it makes the most sense to kind of dictate that would be a manager spot.
We have no problem doing that. I think that's an excellent idea.
Okay. Let's go on to the presentation.
Perfect.
So
Can everyone hear me okay?
I think, Mr.
I'm sorry,
Barrett, did I address your question? Was there another question for me? I thought that Mr. Barrett was asking a question.
I believe you answered, but I was just concerned with the egress path, just for everyone listening, between the ballards and the fence.
All right, thank you.
But thank you.
At this juncture, I'd like to pass the presentation over to Mr. Valari, who will talk a little bit about traffic and drop-off procedures and some of the, what I'll say, safety features that we propose to implement on Columbus. And then I'll come back and talk about the parking subsidy. So Andrew, please.
Perfect. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. All right. So for the benefit of the record and also Miss Height-Nord's reference, my name is Andrew Valeri. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New York. We've provided a large amount of testimony in the record and also at work sessions with your board and also with the zoning board about the project. And in my specific area of expertise is traffic and parking. And before I get into my presentation, I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on the board. You know, we do a lot of presentations in the Northeast, Mr. Jarmel the same. Not everyone has figured out how to do this virtually, so I applaud your board for being one of the first to really get this going, so thank you. The two remaining discussion points that I believe I need to address from a traffic and parking perspective really comes down to the drop-off and pickup during peak hours, how that will operate, which I will explain in depth. And then also another item that was raised at previous conversations was the idea of parking in residential area or having parents or employees of the TLE park in a residential area. As Ms. Tortorella mentioned, I don't want to belabor any of these points, so I'm going to try to summarize my previous testimony as simply as possible. But to go into the drop-off and pickup routine, parents need to physically walk their child into the TLE and sign them in. There will be no children that will be walking unaided or alone into the building. They'll always be accompanied by a parent or guardian. That's because the learning experience is at the forefront of security in the industry. There is a secure access at the front entrance. Only parents and guardians with specific access files will be allowed in. And in light of what I just mentioned, since parents have to leave their vehicle and physically walk into the building, drop-off and pickup occurs via parking stalls. So it's It's different than a typical high school or elementary school where there is a long drop-off line to let children out of the car and walk into the front entrance. That's not the case here. All drop-off and pickup occurs via parking stalls. Similarly, where we deviate from a standard school setup is that there's no specific sign-in time. You know, a high school, you know, everyone shows up at 8:15 because that's when the first bell rings, or everyone shows up between the 15 minutes before then. That's not the case with the learning experience. There's a rolling drop-off and pickup, and we observed a number of these sites throughout the Northeast, and what we see as a result of that rolling drop off and pickup is a much dispersed effect of the traffic pattern. There's no huge spike that you see at 8:15. There's a dispersed effect. So Mr. Jarmel mentioned it previously, and we've studied this as well. The drop off typically happens over an expanded period of time between 6:30 in the morning when they open and 9 o'clock in the morning. And it really depends on parents' schedules. They're doing this on their way to work. They're doing this on their way home from work, depending on what their shifts are. And in the afternoon, pickup happens as early as noon, but then it really happens over an extended period of 2 or 3 hours between 4 and 6:30 p.m. when they close. So to go back to the routine of dropping off or picking up your child, you'll find an available on-street parking space or in a public lot across the street. You'll park your vehicle, take the key out of the ignition. You'll walk with your child across the street. You'll walk down the sidewalk to get to the front entrance of the building. Secure access at the front door. You sign in your child with the caretaker. They take your child and you go back to your vehicle. The pickup routine is the mirror image of the drop-off. Just the exact opposite happens for pickup. And what I want to do now is share my screen and introduce an exhibit that summarizes a number of the improvements that the applicant is taking on off-site in the public right-of-way as a further measure of safety enhancement for this property. So let me see if I can share my screen. All right. So what this summarizes is it's an aerial exhibit. It's dated May 8th, 2020. It's been submitted to the board previously. It summarizes Columbus Avenue, the public parking regulations on the street. The different colors of parking represent what term parking meters there are there. You can see on the east side of Columbus, that's the plan bottom, which is right here. There's parking sections that are outlined in red. Those are additional parking that's recently been added by the village. We've worked with the village's consultant, BFJ Planning, to see if there was some additional parking that could be gained in the area, and this is something that's already been implemented by the village. Again, it's to promote additional parking in the area, not only to TLE, but for the greater public. Any tenant can park here, any resident can park here for the amount of time that the meters allow. This is not something that's directly associated with the learning experience, but it's an improvement that we've recently coordinated with BFJ that the village has installed to provide more parking. What you can see across Columbus Avenue and Underhill Street are two new crosswalks that the applicant will restripe with high visibility striping so that the crosswalk is brand new. It's very visible for motorists and pedestrians. Another thing is in the bottom right-hand side of the exhibit, what's called a pedestrian rapid flashing beacon. You may be familiar with these in similar downtown areas. I know that they're also provided in White Plains. This is a added level of safety for when a pedestrian is in the crosswalk, specifically on Columbus Avenue. The rapid flashing beacon will be actuated and it'll flash yellow so that motorists going north and south on Columbus Avenue can see even more clearly that there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk and they need to yield to that pedestrian. As part of the zoning resolution, there was a stipulation that TLE employ a monitor during drop-off and pickup times. That's in an effort to provide a level of redundancy that there is no double parking on Columbus Avenue. They'll be on the street patrolling the area, and furthering that, what the applicant proposes to do is provide cameras on the outside of the building to do a continual monitoring of the situation, just to keep tabs on how drop-off and pickups are happening. And why that is because the learning experience has contracts with all their parents, all their families, and what they intend to do in this location is write something in the contract providing the recommended measures for drop-off and pickup. And that document will very clearly indicate where you should park and where you should not park. And there will be language in there that speaks specifically to what the ramifications are to violating such a clause. Similarly, the learning experience also has a contract with all of their employees. And in that contract, the learning experience is willing to put something in the employment contract indicating that employees need to park in metered parking, and you are not to park in residential streets where there are no meters further east of the site. And in that contract, there will be a clause for termination should you not comply with where you should park as an employee. And Mr. Jarmel will go into further detail about probably the most important part of this. The learning experience is willing to subsidize parking or on-street meters for their employees. They're also willing to buy permits in public parking spaces. This is all going to be going into further detail by Mr. Jarmel in just one moment, but it's a significant expense that the applicant is willing to go to make sure that parking happens in legal on-street spaces for both its parents and its staff. One other exhibit I want to introduced to the board is a video animation. What this does is combines the off-site improvements that the applicant is proposing to install in the public right-of-way to promote safety, and it also illustrates how a typical drop-off would happen. So if my explanation just a couple of minutes ago was at all confusing, I just want to be quiet for a moment and let the video play. The blue dot represents a pedestrian getting out of the vehicle with a child, crossing Underhill Street, actuating the rapid flashing beacon. Vehicle oncoming would see the rapid flashing beacon, yield to the pedestrian. Once the pedestrian is safely in the building, the vehicle would then commence on the street just as it normally would. As I wrap up my presentation, I just wanted to note a memo that we have submitted previously to both the zoning board and the planning board. It's essentially a summary memo. It's dated November 14th, 2019, and it summarizes all the different analyses we've prepared. I don't mean to go into too much detail about the specific analyses we've prepared for traffic and parking, but what I can tell you is that it's extremely comprehensive, and all along the way, we've had numerous consultations with your board's professionals, Mr. Noah Levine and also Mr. George Jacquemart from BFJ Planning, about the analysis assumptions that went into our findings and also the concluding results. So just to recap, we have a parking study that was last revised August 16th, 2019. We've also done a traffic impact study that's dated it's dated August 16th, 2019. And there are two memos that are very important to this application. There is a BFJ review letter of the parking study that's dated August 30th, 2019, and also a BFJ review letter of the traffic study that's dated September 3rd, 2019. I just want to read a few of the concluding statements from the BFJ memos, not from a Stonefield memo. In response to our parking analysis, BFJ had concluded that drop-off and pickup maneuvers can be accommodated without significant disruption and double parking along Columbus Avenue. That's a verbatim quote from BFJ's memo. And also in reference to our traffic study, the traffic impacts of the proposed TLE center at 21 Columbus Avenue are negligible and not noticeable by the users. So I want to make it abundantly clear that we've done a large number of analyses, all with BFJ's buy-in, and they're in concurrence with our analysis findings. And just to be abundantly clear about something, the total number of required parking spaces that was determined throughout our analysis and agreed upon by BFJ planning, that parking requirement was set by this planning board in their reference to the zoning board, and that zoning board application was approved. So in conclusion, I just want to make it very clear that we work very closely with BFJ planning, and we agree that drop-off and pickup can happen on the street, and there's available parking in the public streets, in public lots that would promote a safe operation of the TLE in this location. And there won't be an impact on parking in residential neighborhoods where there's unmetered parking, because there's a number of measures that the applicant is going towards to ensure that that does not happen. Specifically, the parking subsidy that Mr. Jarmel will explain in a minute, and also the fact that they could be terminated if an employee decides to park in an area where they shouldn't. Similarly with parents. I'd be happy to answer any questions Ms. Tortorella may have of me, if not the board or any members.
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Lard. What is the impact on the traffic light on Main Street? I know you calculated that. Told the public what the impact will be to that traffic light.
The impact on that traffic light was something that's been discussed at length. We have done a level of service analysis that shows what the future operation of that light will be pre and post development. And when we compare the two, we can figure out what the impact of the project is. And when we did that for this project, we found that there really wasn't much of a change in level of service, somewhere on the scale of 1 second per vehicle in the future condition, which isn't a noticeable change in operating conditions for any of the people that are going through the intersection. And then again, that was confirmed by BFJ planning that the impact would be negligible.
Okay. Even though right now today it's just a bear to get through that traffic light, it takes over 2.5.
That's another good point, Mr. Chairman. The operation of the intersection is something that we discussed at the zoning board in depth. My understanding is that the village is undertaking an analysis of that light to figure out if there's anything that can be done to improve operational constraints or any safety impacts that are currently ongoing. But as a result of this project, there are no traffic impacts that should be measurable.
If I can just add to that, I don't think that there was any determination that there was a safety issue with the operation of that intersection. There is a long wait time when you're at that light, but that's an existing condition. My understanding is that that light is controlled by the county, so there's a constraint on the ability to modify that light. I believe that there's a remedy that exists, and it's putting in a new traffic light and upgrading that particular equipment, which would make a difference. But our kind of the delta or our effect on the operation is to add no more than a second per vehicle to the operation. So there isn't really anything more within our control to be able to address it.
No, the concern is you're just adding additional vehicles that are coming to that intersection, and it will have an impact on how quickly one can get through that intersection. Because it just takes a long, specifically when your parents will be dropping off the kids at school between hours of 6:30 and 9 a.m. Those are the peak hours, and then you go from 4 to 6:30, and those are the other peak hours. It's just going to bring an additional potential, 100 cars during that time frame, 120 cars during that time frame, which will again have an impact on traffic, because we live here. We know what it's like, during peak hours in the afternoon, where, traffic backs up to the park on Main Street. And so I mean, we're adding additional cars to the traffic intersection. And again, it will have an impact. And I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. And I know the village is actually doing something about this, but it's going to take time. And again, I just want to share my concern and board's concern, the impact of the additional cars on the line on the intersection.
Respectfully, in response to that, the type of analysis that we've conducted looks at exactly when the intersection is peaking and when the daycare would also be generating traffic. We looked at the exact same time periods of traffic going through the intersection and incorporated that all into our analysis. Something else to keep in mind when you have a use such as childcare is the traffic characteristics of who is patronizing it. So oftentimes, and Mr. Jarmel can further this as well, a parent chooses to go to a certain center based on their routines. They're traveling on Main Street right now. They're going through the center of Tuckahoe because they live in the area. They may decide to go to this facility in the future because they have a daycare center that's very convenient for them. They're not necessarily a new car that's been added because that person would be commuting through Main Street as it is. So the net impact of this project is very clearly outlined in our analysis, and we've shown that there is not an impact that the county would, or that the village would necessarily be concerned of. And any future improvements that do go on at that intersection, we'd be more than willing to cooperate with the county to lend them our data and help them with their analysis and be the best neighbor that we can. But as a result of this project, there is no impact as a result of this, and it's been fully vetted by BFJ Planning.
The other thing I would add to that is that when Epstein's goes out of business completely and is not at all operational, any reoccupancy of this building is going to generate traffic. And that's true of any vacant space that's in the downtown area. So it's not as if it's, we will or we won't be adding traffic. Anybody is going to be adding traffic. And our traffic generation has actually turned out to be less in terms of volume as well as our parking requirements than other uses that could legally occupy this property. So that's just another factor to take into consideration when we're trying to look not just at the quality but the quantity of the impact.
I get that, but as a resident of this community who on a regular basis goes through that intersection, I have concern.
Well, true, but there are other trade-offs and benefits that will be realized, including, continuing to have a good tax rateable on the books, providing employment for people, particularly in this time of what's going on now in the economy and in the employment sector. That's a very positive benefit. This is an entity, a national entity that actually can deliver, as opposed to just a small mom and pop that might have been more severely impacted by what's happening with the pandemic. So, there's always a balancing that has to occur. And in this instance, given the magnitude or lack of a large magnitude of impact, we think that balance does not mean that the effect of a second further delay will be of a degree that it justifies not allowing the use to be occupied in the building.
I'm selfish. I hate waiting at that light.
I hear you. I'm not very patient either. And I actually know that area because I do some business in that area on a personal level. So I know what you mean. But it's not us you should be talking to. We should be having a meeting with the county because this really is a county issue that needs to get resolved. And as Andrew said, we're certainly happy to share our data and share our information and help to be an advocate with that to get that improved. Because, it's frustrating because there is a solution. It's not that there isn't a solution. There's a solution. It just requires people to focus on it and to actually implement it.
Yeah, I'm still selfish. Okay, let's move on. Matthew, I guess it's your turn.
Thank you. So just a quick recap of the process that's gotten us here tonight. As most of you are aware, this project required a special use permit from the zoning board before it could come here tonight for site plan approval. However, one of the requirements or lack of requirements in the ordinance is it doesn't identify a specific number of parking spaces that are needed for the childcare center. It kind of leaves that power, the way I understand it, up to the planning board. So as many of you know, we've worked with this board for many months, along with BFJ and our consultant Stonefield, to determine what the appropriate allocation of parking would be for this center. And it was determined and agreed upon and summarized in a letter from your board on December 5th to the zoning board that the applicant would need a total of 19 parking spaces, of which 14 would be required for staff parking. So with that criteria set, we went to the zoning board. The zoning board, I think we went before them 3 times and ultimately approved our special permit and issued it. And one of the things that they left, or kind of, I'll say, remanded or sent back to the planning board is understanding and working out a parking subsidy with us or with our tenant to mitigate the potential of staff parking in your residential neighborhoods, because we understand that that's a problem to you. So with that said, too many exhibits for me to go through here. We identified a need for 14 parking spaces, and I should add that both BFJ and Stonefield agreed that there is ample parking in the village to support our use. It wasn't an issue of quantity of parking. It was an issue of where people were going to park because of the cost, which leads us to the subsidy. So we're prepared to make a cash payment or allocate $17,330 a year towards a parking subsidy for staff that will promote or mitigate the possible risk of them parking in residential areas. I summarized this in a letter to the board that was dated May 8th, and I'm going to be reading from that as I go through this. That $17,330 is essentially will cover 71.4% of the parking spaces we need, of the 14 parking spaces. And this is how it'll work. There'll be 1 parking space on site that we don't have to pay for, so that's a free space to us. We have had discussions with the village and the village clerk, and it's our understanding that there are 5 permits being held for us, assuming this project is approved, in the Lake Avenue lot. Those permits, annual cost of those permits is $1,750. So the total cost of those 5 permits is $8,750. In this board's December 5th letter to the zoning board, you recommended that the applicant pay for at least 50% of the cost of metered parking. So we have a requirement for 14 parking spaces. If you take into consideration the 5 permits, the 1 on site, that leaves 8 parking spaces for us that would be metered. Those 8 parking spaces, according to your website, can be purchased at a full day rate of $8.25 a day using the Pango app. If we have 260 days a year that we're open, that's 5 days a week times 52 weeks. And if you multiply 825 times 8 times 260 and take 50% of that, you have another $8,580. So if you add that cost to the permit of $8,750, you come to a total annual cost of $17,330. And basically that equates for us for paying or providing 10 out of the 14 spaces. So there's only, because we're providing 50% of the meter. That's our initial commitment in terms of dollars and number of parking spaces. So initially, right now today, that's $17,330 buys 10 of the 14 parking spaces, which is how I got to the 71.4% being provided. However, over time, we anticipate being able to increase the number of parking spaces we control. What does that mean? That means that we will purchase additional permits from the village as they become available. It's our understanding that merchant permits are available at a rate of $850 per permit, which are sold to merchants that operate businesses in the area. And that these permits right now, or at least at the time, our last discussion with the village clerk, they were all sold out. But she told us that they become available every several months and that we can put ourselves on a waiting list and buy these permits and control them as they become available. Because these permits are significantly less expensive than the meters, it will allow us to take that money and reallocate it from meters to permits as they become available. In fact, the cost of the meter for a year is 2.5 times the cost of a merchant permit. So we're fairly confident that over the course of 1 year, 12 to 18 months, though we'll be able to acquire more permits and reallocate the money, thus providing more parking subsidy to our staff. One thing I'll note is day one we open, we're not at full occupancy. In fact, as you know, we've discussed hopefully getting to a goal of being about 85% occupied, which means as we ramp up over time, and a lot depends how quickly we ramp up or have absorption, depends on the time of year we open. However, we think that as we're ramping up, we can also acquire more parking spaces. So that's what we propose for a parking subsidy. But we also propose some additional controls. And by the way, although I realize the developer's profit isn't necessarily a concern of the board, I just want to kind of emphasize that if you take $17,330 a year and capitalize it at what a learning experience is worth to trade in the market, it's costing the developer about $240,000 in value of the building to provide that $17,000. So $17,330. So it's a very significant contribution and direct hit to the value of the property that we're proposing to develop. So some of the provisions that we propose to put in place to track our employees, as Mr. Valeri said, is that when an employee is hired, there's usually an employment agreement. He called it a contract. I would say it's not a contract, it's an employee agreement. And within that agreement, the operator of the learning experience will state the guidelines about where you're allowed to park, emphasize that you're not allowed to park in the residential neighborhoods. And if you would like, we can provide specific areas or streets to put into that agreement. And that employees will be required to register their license plate of their vehicle with the learning experience. This will allow you as residents, if you see, we'll say, an offender or a car that's parking in a neighborhood that doesn't look like it belongs there to someone that lives in that neighborhood, you can call the police or you can call the learning experience directly and say, I saw this car, give a description with the license plate, and the learning experience manager will check their records. And if it's one of their employees, that employee will be reprimanded. At first, they'll be spoken to, and if it continues to happen on an ongoing basis, they may be suspended or they may be terminated from employment. So we understand your concern. We've spoken to our tenant. They're taking it very seriously and are prepared to help work with the village by way of this subsidy and by way of sort of policing the staff to make sure that they are not parking in the residential neighborhoods.
So can you explain how the subsidy will work in a sense? For example, are you giving the money directly to your employees? How is this 50% distributed?
So we're in the process of developing a procedure for that. We believe that it'll occur one of two ways, one or two, or both ways. One is the employees will be able to pay for it on their own and submit a receipt to the operator, who will then reimburse them when they get paid. Or two, we're trying to understand how we may be able to pay in advance using the Pango app and registering the license plates for it.
Have you spoken to the police department? Because I think they're working closely with Pango, and so I think when I last spoke to the chief of police, I think he said it could work through Pango somehow. Has anyone had any discussions with him?
I have not, but we have been in, so we've been in communications with the police, but they're looking for the village council to kind of authorize them to work with us on that. And presumably that will take place if this board acts favorably on this application. But we're prepared.
Whatever we decide, it has to be put part of the resolution.
Understood. Okay.
So I'm recommending that you speak to the chief of police, and Gary, please, if at all possible, provide them the ability to do so, and try to get
of course.
Possible.
I spoke to the chief, I think it was today, actually, and we prepared the letter. The zoning board was looking for a letter of basically no objection. Part of part of the code says that they have to, the police have to chime in, that they don't have an objection to the application. And so that letter's prepared. So we should have that from the chief in the next day or so. And that's fine. I'll have no problem telling the chief he's, you can speak with the applicant.
We're trying to come up with a system where we have a system in place that says, okay, this has to happen. The subsidized parking. I just want something concrete that can be included as part of the resolution, so that there's no ambiguity later on.
Okay.
So
that's fair.
Mr. Chairman, we've made the commitment to pay. So the mechanics of it, we're open and flexible to working with you or the chief of police or whoever operates your Pango system to make that work. But I will say on the record that we have no problem allowing the employees to pay on their own and then reimbursing them in accordance with the agreement.
Yeah, I'm sure we could come up with some sort of resolution. I just want to make sure that I think it might be the easiest way to do this is through the Pango app.
I agree.
And to your point, when merchant spaces become available, it's an easier transition from one fee to another fee, basically.
Okay, understood. That would be helpful. Thank you. I would like just to also reinforce a few of the things that Mr. Villari mentioned and maybe just want to make sure that they were communicated. Mr. Villari showed a diagram that depicted how the meters have kind of, what I'll say, be reshuffled, working with BFJ in terms of determining what are 4 hours, what are 6 hours, what are 12 hours. That reshuffling, as was stated, added 11 parking spaces, which we're excited about. We think that helps all the residents or stores in the village. But it also included identifying 6 spaces that would be converted to 15-minute parking spaces. Currently, you don't have 15-minute parking spaces. So we see that as being beneficial to our use for drop-off and pickup, but it's also beneficial to any patron of a store or retail use or the post office in the area that has a quick run-in, run-out type of operation. So we were asked as I guess part of your December 5th letter to the zoning board, it was suggested that we pay for those meter heads because the village does not currently have 15-minute meter heads. We're prepared to do that. So we're going to pay for those 15-minute meter heads. I want to also kind of just emphasize that the developer proposes to pay for these flashing beacons that Mr. Villari talked about and the restriping of the crosswalk. So it's not a cost the village will incur. We've estimated that cost of those upgrades to the streets about $25,000 to $30,000. So we're prepared to do that as well.
Okay.
And with that, unless anyone has any further questions for Mr. Valeri or myself, I think we've completed our presentation to you this evening.
No, do you have any questions for the applicant?
No, I think that they captured everything pretty accurately. Just to recap a couple of things. Yes, we did work with TLE and the village on kind of finding new spaces, new on-street spaces on Columbus Avenue that weren't previously utilized. They were actually striped off. So we did gain a couple of spaces. I think that in previous meetings, there was some discussion about increasing the number of 4-hour parking spaces that would presumably be geared towards employees or workers. So the ratio of 4-hour spaces to 12-hour spaces, I think, is still under discussion, or I'm not sure if that has been finalized. I guess we need to confirm that with the village, but there are more spaces for employees. So it's not really a capacity issue. It's really more making sure that the employees utilize those spaces. And so from a traffic engineering standpoint, George Alkmaar from our office reviewed the capacity assessment, the parking analysis that Stonefield conducted, and it did seem like there was adequate capacity in the surrounding area. And then from a traffic impact statement, it did appear that the traffic, the additional traffic would be about 1 second. And just to reiterate what Andrew said, a lot of the traffic just has to do with the long delays because of the signal. The signal timing, I believe, is it's about a complete cycle. I think is about 150 seconds, which is quite long for traffic lights. And it doesn't matter, you could just hit a red light and you'll be stuck in traffic, or you could just go right through. But the average delay is what it is, just based on the signal. And I think that there's a lot of attention towards this project because it's directly adjacent to the traffic light, but it wouldn't be that different if the use was further down Columbus. It would still create the same amount of traffic, and but it does have kind of a heightened sense of kind of cause and effect because it is located right there. Granted, there might be some short-term delays with cars pulling in and out of the short-term spaces. So there is some kind of small, impact there, but we didn't see that as it being a significant impact on the intersection. So I think that, kind of concludes our assessment. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have that based on the testimony you heard from the applicant.
Does anyone from the board have any questions for the applicant?
No, I think we've been through this thoroughly, and it's been an ongoing process. I think the applicant has done their due diligence in our requests. There aren't concerns in this location. So
Ray, have any questions?
I'm good. I just I have one note, I guess. You mentioned, Andrew, a flashing beacon would be installed at the crosswalk. From my experience, those sometimes, or most of the time, don't really work. People tend to see them and they slow down. It's only when they actually see people crossing when they stop. So it's more of a visual. Stop sign or a big bold red sign telling you to stop actually works better, in my opinion. Again, and that's an experience. I take my daughter to school, before this this whole thing happened, and I got the experience to use those flashing crosswalks, and I can tell you, no one really stops, you know. So that was just one note.
What I can say in response to that is were we to consider putting a stop sign there, what that does is it creates more of a delay for traffic going north and south on Columbus Avenue. So what we're trying to do is balance promoting traffic up and down the roadway, but then also providing more of a visual cue that there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk. I'm not exactly certain what type of pedestrian rapid flashing beacon that you see at your daughter's school, but we're intending to provide something here that flashes very brightly to further promote the visual acuity of seeing a pedestrian in that crosswalk. Sometimes you'll see that light sooner than you'll see a pedestrian, and that's the whole idea. You want to see that flashing light before you see someone in that crosswalk. And it's shown throughout the industry that these things are very helpful as a safety and visual impact perspective.
There's a light like that at the top of Fisher and Post Road 22. It's very effective because it works when a person goes through it. You do see it flashing. It can give you a headache, but it's good. And that traffic light that everybody's talking about, it's called a lunchtime light. I mean, no, seriously, they did an article about it in the Journal News, and they named that light as a lunchtime light because it was so long. So I understand, I feel you.
It always makes me late for dinner. Okay, is Ray back? Ray? Is he still on?
It
he's
looks
still
like
on.
he's still on. I unmuted him. Hey, Ray, you there?
No questions.
No questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to make a motion to open the public hearing. Can I have a second, please?
So moved.
Second, David Barra.
Ray is second. Is anyone from the public who wish to comment on this application? I'm not sure if he's on. Anyone
Let
on?
me try to unmute everybody. That's muted.
Raise your hand somehow, or how does that work?
Well, some people we can't see.
There's a couple people in the call right now that are members of my office and not intending to speak, just for the record.
I have an Alan Brandeis. Is that one on the team?
Yes, I'm with the applicant.
Okay. Demi?
Applicant.
Applicant and a Victoria Epstein?
Applicant.
Oh, okay. And then we
Unrelated
have
to Epstein's.
Okay. I think that's all accounted for then, Mr. Chair. I don't think there's anyone else from the public that would be on here.
And the public was made aware that this meeting was taking place now, right?
Correct, yeah, we posted. Bill, you posted it on the website, right?
I actually
Yes.
saw it. Okay.
Yeah.
Point, I make a motion to keep the public hearing open. I'd like to keep them a month. Have a second.
Second that, David Barra.
Okay, so there's a couple little things that need to be finalized. So hopefully by the next meeting you'll have that. Ideally, what we do with Pango, please speak to the chief of police. I think you may have some ideas to execute that. And if at all possible, can you also get a set of documents mailed over to the building department for the planning board? So she can get up to speed on this project.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Anything else, guys?
I have a question, just for record purposes. Have you received any written comments from the public on the application for this hearing?
I do not. I haven't seen anything. Bill, received anything?
I haven't been in the office in a week, so I couldn't tell you.
Mike?
I haven't seen anything. Usually Marianne will send it on to me if something does come in, and I would instruct her to forward it to the board. So we haven't seen anything.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think anything's come in.
Okay, so let's hope that we get some comments or some additional people coming in the next meeting.
We'll get some comments from the fire department.
Yes, so yes, yeah, I forgot about that. Please speak to the fire department and see if the revised plan is to their approval.
Yes.
Anybody have any other questions, concerns, issues? All right, so thank you very much. We'll see everybody next month.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
We'll see you at the next work session, Matthew.
If you would like us to be there, we can be there.
Just to basically discuss, if you've had any sort of resolution and how the parking situation would work.
That'd be fine. Do you know offhand the date of that, Mr. Chairman?
I don't.
The
First Tuesday of the month.
Okay, we'll figure it out.
Okay. All right. So thank you, guys. So at this point, since there is no other business, I make a motion to close the planning board meeting. Can I have a second, please?
Second, David Barra.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. Have a great week. Stay safe and healthy.